I want to bring in former Pentagon official, AEI scholar Michael Rubin on the telephone right now, and Washington Examiner reporter David Drucker in Washington. Michael, you've actually stayed in this hotel. What should we be looking for during this active hostage gun situation?
Well, Maria, there's actually precedent here. If you remember back in 2008, there was a terrorist hostage-taking in Mumbai, India. Now, that didn't end well, and one of the problems we have is that if these terrorists are intent on simply causing carnage, inspired by the Islamic State, for example, then it's going to be very difficult to rescue the hostages. And of course, we've also had a great deal of political instability in Mali in recent years, with French intervention to defeat a al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb takeover over the north of that country.
So you think that's really what's behind this, then, the relationship between Mali and the French? I mean, you know, but why Mali?
Well, I think, frankly, it's a soft target,
right?
And you have Westerners who are staying in the middle of the hotel. If there's a crackdown in Europe, if there's a crackdown where it's impossible to create the sort of carnage that they did in Paris just a couple weeks ago, then this provides a target of opportunity. And unfortunately, taking these soft targets either in European capitals, outside of Europe, or even in the United States, I think it's going to become the new normal.
All right, David Drucker, weigh in here. This, as the House was poised to approve that Syrian refugees bill yesterday. How do you see it from Washington?
Yeah, look, the bill was approved in the House, and I think now the question is what happens in the Senate, where it is subject to a filibuster. Are Democrats going to side with the president, or are they going to, first of all, give this thing the 60 votes it needs to get to the president's desk? And second of all, will it get to 67, which would be enough for a veto override, which was the margin. We saw a veto override margin yesterday in the House.
Keith McCullough, you're seeing a live tweet right now in terms of breaking news. What are you seeing?
Yeah, in the modern age, we get to get these live updates. Whether they're true or not is another matter. But security forces stormed the Bamako hotel. 3 dead, 15 hostages freed. How quickly can they react, and who's controlling this situation?
David?
Oh, well, look, I think it all depends on what the situation is and how on top of it they are. As we've learned, these things develop fast, and often the information we think we have is not the information that, as it actually stands. And so I think it's going to be a couple of hours at least before we really understand what's going on.
Michael, apparently those that have been freed because they were able to cite verses from the Quran. I mean, clearly, you know, they are talking about the Quran, and that's the only way they are freeing anyone from that hotel right now. Does that give you? How do you read that?
Well, I read that we have a situation in which Islamist-inspired terrorists are simply out to target Westerners, and perhaps they're doing this in order to maintain some degree of popular support in an overwhelmingly Muslim-majority country like Mali. I don't think they will have that support. After all, Mali is recovering from its 2012-2013 instability, and the tourist trade is actually important, so I think people are going to be bitter about this. That said, when we're looking at stories of storming the hotel, remember that the French do have forces in Mali because of what happened, and therefore it's not simply going to be the Malians going in on their own. Presumably they're going to be taking some advice.
These French aren't as soft as people thought. I mean, you guys are pretty hardcore. That's good to see.
To Michael's point, the religious makeup of Mali is almost 95% Muslim, so a majority, but there's only 5% of the population that is not Muslim. But Michael, I want to ask you, how do we fit into fighting the global, now we can call it a global war on terror, because we are still a marginal actor in even what France, along with Russia, is doing in Syria, and even locally. We're still on the sidelines. Certainly a heightened awareness about a potential attack here, but where do we fit in to this picture?
Well, we fit in because this terrorism is motivated by ideology, and therefore we are considered part of the problem. Unfortunately, Secretary of State John Kerry and many in the State Department still want to look at terrorism through the lens of grievance, which can be comforting, because if it's done through the lens of grievance, then you can use diplomacy to extricate yourself from the situation. Unfortunately, that doesn't reflect reality. So no matter what diplomatic formulas we come up with to address various grievances, sectarian politics in Baghdad, other issues, the fact of the matter is the Islamic State and those inspired by it are going to come after us whether we like it or not.
We still do not know if this is ISIS or if this is Al-Qaeda. I mean, this was talked about earlier that this could be Al-Qaeda. Is there anything specific to this situation that would indicate which group it might be and how that might make this different?
Well, I mean, to some extent, there's a degree of alphabet soup in all of this. Osama bin Laden famously said, everyone loves the strong horse, whether it's Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, whether it's the Islamic State. The fact of the matter is they're all going towards the same aim, and there's ever-shifting movement between the various groups, so we shouldn't constrain ourselves also into looking at this as if they have the same sort of organizational structure as German businesses.
I see.
Back to the ideology, Michael. You know, many would say that the Quran says that this is exactly what they think they should be doing. How would you react to that?
Well, ultimately, it depends on one's reading of the Quran. What is important to remember, however, that in a battle of ideology, we shouldn't be sacrificing our national security on the altar of political correctness. And when people want to extricate the religious motivation from this, we forget we're not doing a service to the moderate Muslims, because even though it's the headlines when Westerners are targeted, the people who do most of the dying in the fight against radical Islamism are the moderate Muslims themselves. The rate of green-on-green violence, for example, is 3 times that of green-on-blue violence. And by that I mean green-on-blue is, for example, when an Afghan policeman turns his guns on NATO colleagues. We forget that it's mostly the moderate Muslims who do the dying. And I just came back from Iraq. You know, people just roll their eyebrows when people try to say this has nothing to do with religion.
And I mean, when people see that this is happening in Mali, are they making the connection of the relationship between France and Mali? And you said earlier that there was obviously support from the French in terms of troops.
Well, they will be making that simply because the French are going to be involved one way or another, but I wouldn't say that's a motivating factor. I mean, ultimately, when people are targeting hotels and other soft targets, they're doing it because A, they can get media attention, B, because they can target Westerners. And if you go after the Radisson Blu Hotel in Bamako, you can be guaranteed that you're going to get French citizens in there. If you get Americans on top of that from a terrorist perspective, that's just a bonus.
Yeah.